I can't hear the volume.
Taking stock of the interests of stakeholders from different disciplines that are
Just checking that you can hear it now, Ian?
Yes.
Yeah.
interested in age-friendly homes and housing, and we've been meeting with academics, we've been meeting with industrialists, SMEs, and people from local authorities, local government, national government, because we are working towards what the European Commission is calling a reference framework for age-friendly housing. With this project, we are sowing seeds. That's what we're doing. We're pulling the right people together with fertile imaginations, and we're throwing ideas out there, and it's up to them to take those ideas and see what happens. And then they feed back to us, and that's exactly what we saw today. You know, people feeding back bigger ideas than we shared, and then we'll take those bigger ideas and we'll move them out again. So it's a very organic process. It's a very rewarding process for those people that are within, because you can attend these kind of events, get lots of talking heads saying the same thing, what we call the usual suspects. And what we've managed to achieve with this project is a lot of unusual suspects that are bringing fresh ideas to the space. And more importantly, we've got young unusual suspects that are coming in and saying, hey, we want to do something for our older selves. We're not talking about the elderly and them over there. We're talking about our futures. So we have to do something about it. And this is what we're willing to do.
So thank you for that, Nell. Can I just check that everyone is actually seeing and hearing that? Could we get on the chat or some hands reflection, because as we are seeing it one way. Yes, great, thank you. Okay, because I got somebody was unable to see it. That's good. Right, so I want to set the scene briefly by, well, just reflecting on that for a moment, which is, it's about taking the ideas that you're going to hear today and distilling them and actually repurposing the thinking process and feeding back to us so that we can actually refine the proposition as we go. And when I talk about the proposition, for those of you that attended the initial event that we held last May with the with ISO, we kind of set the scene. We explored the viability of creating a standard for multi-generational neighborhoods. We had the evidence. ISO brought to us evidence that said there is an appetite to create a standard for multi-generational communities and neighborhoods. And given the increasing needs of society following COVID-19, which when we had our event in May was really just building, we had no idea of the number of lockdowns that we would have, and that's a very wide it extends across the world now. It's quite extraordinary, and I think that the ideas that we've been looking at are reinforced by the isolation that older adults in particular have experienced. So if you could turn the slide for me, please. The intent behind this new standard is to take account of other standards and priority areas for ISO, which include the dementia inclusive environments, aging workforce, health promotion and preventive care in older age, social connectedness, communities with multi-generational people, which is effectively where we come in, and support for carers. Now, I'm not going to read through these. I just want to give you an insight into a handful. This is not exhaustive. These are 3 pages of existing ISO standards that correlate with what we're doing, that will be layered within. But just to give you a flavor of the depth that we will need to get into to create any kind of definition of what constitutes best practice. And the next. So this is the proposition. Working in a spirit of open innovation, we intend to establish a coalition of partners, and I've got to move, willing to pool resources and share data and know-how. Collectively, these innovation sites will provide the settings in which to develop and test innovative practices and solutions, undertake consumer-centric research to understand the experiences of citizens and service providers. It's really important that we take stock of the needs of people, obviously. Define the prerequisites for ensuring the cooperation and compliance of participating commercial and public organizations, and determine strategic plans for future schemes and the associated standards and policy interventions, i.e., how can we define best practice at a local level and then provide the tools that will allow repetition, will allow scalability. These master planned, health-focused communities will be open to all, but supportive of older adults, individuals with disabilities and other vulnerable populations. This is essential. We are not just talking about older people, although it's essential that we do, but at the end of the day, hopefully everybody here will get older, you know? And so what we're doing in terms of planning for the future is being inclusive now. Next, please. So the primary goals are to improve the capacity for older adults to live well and thrive in multi-generational neighborhoods, enabled through smart technology and personalized care, to tailor care to achieve optimum outcomes for people living with disabilities and or chronic conditions, especially frail older adults, to generate evidence-based guidance, evidence really important, to inform industry so that they will invest, and bridge developing technologies with real home health needs, actual and preventative. Bearing in mind, a lot of the technology currently exists, it just needs to be purposed properly. Provide innovative training scenarios for healthcare practitioners to partner with individuals and their care partners in ways that recognize their expertise. Explore what we call digital plumbing to create a landing and an interoperable footing for current and future smart technologies to be easily and invisibly weaved into new housing and neighborhood construction. We'll talk more about this later, the technological piece, but it's essential that we do have that digital infrastructure in order to build, because if you just come up with solutions, it is not going to work, and we've seen that over the past 10 years. Promote development of more age-friendly, multi-generational environments, employing user-centered design, as well as retrofitting and modifying existing housing. We've got sessions looking at design aspect and the retrofitting this afternoon. And establish principles of coexistence, guidelines, and a voluntary code of conduct. So it's a pretty ambitious agenda, and we're thinking that this is going to take 4 to 5 years. It also correlates very nicely with the aims and aspirations of the World Health Organization and their decade of healthy aging. Next slide, please. So in terms of the next steps, today we are kicking that off. So this event is bringing together some partners who are planning to build, actually to lead by example, rather than just rhetoric. This event will introduce you to some tangible projects that are going to share the insights of their development. They're going to pool resources, and we will add to these developments during the course of the year. In May, we will have a follow-up event where we will start to consolidate some of the findings. During the course of this year, we will build towards the recommendations that will be submitted to the various ISO technical committees, which will then address the issues we're talking about over the next 2.5 years. So it is a long-term project. You can't start, you know, and do this overnight. But actually, if we work collaboratively with consensus, and enough of you here, and indeed others that you can engage with, embrace this movement, if you will, we have a chance of making things different and actually promoting change, real change. And I think, let's face it, we need it now more than ever. So that is the end of my piece. I am now going to introduce you to our friends at ISO, so thank you. Nell, are we starting with you on this one? Or no, we're not, sorry. We're starting with Nathan Taylor, who's the Technical Program Manager for ISO, and he's been supporting this initiative for quite some time, because he was one of the people that identified that there is a priority area that needs to be addressed in terms of multi-generational communities and neighborhoods. Nathan, good to see you.
Ian, thank you, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening from Geneva. Before I start again, would very much like to give thanks to our member body BSI for leading this work, along with Agile Aging Alliance, and thanks to the sponsors of today's event, of Clarion Housing Group. So I've been asked really to speak essentially about what standardization is and where standardization is going, because I think this really applies. And I was pleased to see in the video a lot of the principles of standardization in terms of stakeholder engagement, forward-looking. That was reflected really quite well in the video that was presented. So in essence, what are international standards? And standardization is essentially a process to make a product, process, or service fit for purpose, whether that be usability, compatibility, interchangeability, health and safety, environmental protection, product protection, mutual understanding, economic performance. It's a very wide universe, encompassing engineering, encompassing social responsibility, and in essence, an international standard is a consensus-based document providing rules, guidelines, or characteristics for activities or for their results. And essentially, the core term of standardization is achieving the optimum degree of order in a given context. So it can take many forms. We're probably quite familiar with product standards, test methods, but I think as well really codes of practice, guideline standards, and management system standards, which is a very particular group of integrated management standards within the ISO system. If we can go forward one, please, now. So the system itself is really 3 pillars, when somebody asks, okay, who actually writes the standards? It is experts. It's very much the people that are in this conversation, representing industry, representing academia, representing civil society, representing local government, and in essence, the ISO system is designed to bring stakeholders from different groups together to work to write standards based on consensus. We're a member-driven organization, so the ISO system is represented by 162 members, and it is through the national member bodies that stakeholders are engaged, and then through the technical committee structure, that they're brought together to address well over 300 different subjects that are covered by technical committees. And the Central Secretariat, where I'm based, is really the coordination system that really coordinates the overall system. So it is really, really see yourself as connected to the system. It is a system for all types of organizations at all levels of development, and our job as the Secretariat and as national member bodies is to facilitate participation and really bring stakeholders together for the benefit of everyone. So if we can go one forward, please, Nell. So through the system, we've published over 20,000 standards. We have 320 different technical committees that are active, developing, I think in last year, even a very challenging year, I believe we published about 1,400 standards in 2020. So what I want to touch on next is where we're going from this point, because I think we can appreciate we're at a juncture, we're at a point of change. And the ISO 2030 strategy, this was approved by our council at the end of last year. And this is really where we want to see ourselves going forward. We want to see wide use of ISO standards. We want to really be able to ensure that all voices from all stakeholder groups are heard. And we want to be responsive to present and emerging global needs, and ultimately looking towards making lives easier, safer, and better. So I think if we can go one forward now. This is a lot of the work that we're going to be doing, really looking at the ISO system in the future. I think that really the conversation around demonstrating the benefits of voluntary standardization, being cognizant of the market and delivering standards when the market needs them, but also taking a forward look in terms of what are some of the future opportunities for international standardization. And we're looking at a lot of activities in terms of strategic planning, in terms of foresight, to really be able to look towards those opportunities. But very much these conversations that we're having right now, this is really about capturing what those future opportunities are. And then I think in terms of having more voices heard, we engage a lot with our members in developing countries to really strengthen their capacity to be able to articulate and build consensus among their national stakeholders. But I think as well continuing to advance diversity within the ISO system. And I was actually quite pleased to see in the video the perspective of youth. And one of the initiatives I'm working on is around bringing young professionals into standardization. And I think I think what was articulated in the video is what we're talking about within this forum. This is really for everyone. So so that's really what our work really in terms of helping the ISO system respond to really the challenge of the 2020s and the 2030s is what we're going to be looking towards. And I think very much these conversations are supporting these priorities. Now, if you can go one forward, please. So I think overall, we're looking at these drivers. We're looking at the uncertainty. We're looking at technology. We're looking at societal expectations. And I think very much we're seeing those expectations really in flux right now. And then I think really looking at that environmental perspective, that the urgency for action and on sustainability has not gone away with the pandemic. So I think this is very much, it's an exciting plan going forward. If you can go forward one slide, please, Noah. And I think this is really where we're trying to align our work towards, is the Sustainable Development Goals. And the timeline for the ISO strategy is aligned with these goals. And I think if you explore through this, what is essentially the global development agenda for the next decade, you'll see a lot of goals and indicators that are very much related to the work that's being done in terms of aging societies and really advancing that diversity and inclusiveness that you're discussing. So kind of in the space around, and we have to recognize that some of the ISO's origins in the 40s was very much in an engineering space, but I think as societal needs have evolved, you've seen more involvement ISO within the social space. So I think when we look at the ISO 26000 standard, this is really one of our flagship documents around social development and really how organizations can contribute to sustainable development and their impacts on society and environment. And this really provides core guidance in terms of how business and organizations can operate in an ethical and transparent way that contributes to sustainable development while responding to stakeholder needs, laws, regulations, and norms. But I think kind of going forward, we've certainly delved more into the specific issue around aging and disability. If you can go forward one, please, now. And I think this is recognizing, and again, this is really looking at this foresight in terms of what some of these future trends are. And asking ourselves the question of how can standardization help societies cope with the challenge that societal aging brings and maximizing those opportunities. So this, I would say, in the ISO system, this work would have started about 4 years ago with what we called International Workshop Agreement 18, which provided some of the foundations for the work for the establishment of ISO TC 314. And we also put out a guide around addressing accessibility and standards, because I think we can appreciate as the fields of standardization are growing wider and growing more complex and more cross-cutting, it's important to be able to articulate and manage those cross-cutting themes. And I think this is really where the work of TC 314, which I'll ask Nell to discuss in a bit more detail. If you go forward one, please, Nell. That one of the mechanisms we use in the ISO system is, we call it a liaison, which is essentially a communication and an engagement mechanism with other technical committees within the ISO system. So I think with the work that 314 is doing, they're looking at what other committees working with vulnerable consumers, sustainable cities, occupational health and safety, acoustics, noise, and lighting. So I think really there's an opportunity in working with kind of a cross-cutting technical committee like Aging Societies to really look at the impact of aging societies across all of these other areas. And there's a real strength within the ISO system that can facilitate bringing these conversations together and bringing the stakeholders together and achieving consensus in terms of what is that optimal state of order. So I'm going to stop there, and then I'll ask Nell if she can discuss a little bit more of what's going on in TC 314. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nathan, for running through it from the beginning to where we are now. So as Nathan mentioned, we've been going for about 2 years now in active working with the Aging Societies experts. So here you can see the structures we already have in place. So we have groups that are focusing on the strategy and the future of the committee. And then we have the individual working groups that are tackling the actual projects of standardization, where all the national committees provide their experts to. So at the moment we have 20 participating countries and also 18 observing countries. So as I said, it's a very new committee, so we expect this to grow as we see more projects being announced. At the moment, we have 3 active work items which are actually progressing really well, and we expect them to publish early 2022. They're actually currently undergoing a public consultation. So if you're interested to see what it looks like and provide your feedback, this is the moment to do so by reaching out to your national mirror bodies. So the first one is a framework for dementia-inclusive communities. We also have guidelines for an age-inclusive workforce. And then the one that has progressed the most is the guidelines for a care-inclusive organization. So aside from the work that we're already doing, we have 3 other priority areas allocated to the initial work items for the committee. So one of those is health promotion and preventive care, social connectedness, and then lastly, but definitely not least, because we're here today, is the communities with multi-generational people. So because this was in the strategic business plan, I started to explore where we can take this next, and discovered Ian's work in this field. And then we had that discussion in May with a wide range of stakeholders to see how we can start building a framework around this to start looking at a standard. And then we also have some other interest points which are not necessarily not a priority, but because there's a lot of overlap with other committees, we are more in a facilitating role to ensure that the older person is being recognized in that. So for instance, within accessibility standards and so forth. So in terms of the projects that are currently actively being discussed in the committee, during the last plenary in November, we had the presentation from Ian on the initial scope and intentions of what we want to do with this work. And it was really received very well by the international committee members. I think we are ready now to look further into fine-tuning the proposal and the scope with a wider stakeholder group. So hopefully today we will see a little bit more in detail what it's going to look like. And one of the key things was that we want to see those practical guidance that these pilot projects that Ian has been talking about can provide us in that standard, which I think a lot of people are waiting for, to give them some guidance in organizations and in communities. So that's really highly anticipated. We also have a few other topics that we are exploring. So for instance, dementia-friendly symbols, well-being, response times for automated services, and so forth. But I recommend that if you have an interest in our work, to keep up to date with what we're doing via our website. And if you have specific questions on the technical committee's work, then please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Nell. And Nathan,